out to remind the membership about the industrial union principles upon which the TW was built. In 1959, on the 25th anniversary of the TW's founding, Mike Quill had not mellowed one bit. Just let me digress 1 second. The commemorations that were held to honor James Connolly still go on to this day in TW Local 100. Every March, we have an event and we honor James Connolly and Mike Quill. And it's an awesome event, and it's an awesome commemoration of our commitment to industrial trade unionism, the principles that were founded by Connolly and taken on by Mike Quill, which have succeeded in to this day, a 42,000 member strong, powerful transit workers union. So he started it, and we continue it. At the time, in 1959, Quill wrote, "My experiences over the last 25 years convinced me that the meek inherit only misery, starvation, and an unmarked grave at Potter's Field. Only the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Mellons, the oil kings, and the railroad tycoons inherit the earth." I guess some things never change. That was 1959, and certainly seems like there's a lot of that going on these days. Quill stated, "Let's be humble in our victories, and let's never be meek in the struggle to achieve our legitimate aspirations." Despite all of Mike Quill's great contributions to the TW and to our society at large, he is best remembered for taking the TW out in the first citywide strike of the bus and subway system for 11 days, beginning New Year's Day in 1966. His response, Mike Quill's response to an injunction against the strike was that the judge can drop dead in his black robes, I won't call off the strike. And that statement by Quill has become one of the most iconic lines in American labor history. Mike Quill was only 60 years old when he passed away of heart failure just a few days after the strike's end. Ironically, he told his wife earlier on the day of his death that he hoped to be well enough to go back to Ireland later that year to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Easter Rising. He didn't make it. Actually, the strike did him in. Quill's deep sense of belief in industrial unionism and his rabid defense of it in the union's formative years has kept the TW Local 100 a true industrial union. Thanks to those efforts, industrial trade unionism remains a part of our DNA. It's a legacy that all of us in the TW are proud of, and we're going to fight for that industrial legacy as the years go by. We're never going to go back. As for Quill's philosophy of life, he summed it up as follows. It's a direct quote from Quill. "I believe in the corporal works of mercy, the 10 Commandments, the American Declaration of Independence, and James Connolly's outline of a socialist society. Most of my life, I've been called a lunatic because I believe that I am my brother's keeper. I organize poor and exploited workers. I fight for the civil rights of minorities, and I believe in peace. It appears to have become old-fashioned to make social commitments, to want a world free of war, free of poverty, and free of disease. This is my religion." And I will end with this. It's a very simple ending. Mike Quill was one hell of a guy. Thank you, everybody.
That was terrific, John, terrific. Very much in the style of Mr. Quill. You know, one of the things about being a showrunner is you constantly are faced with stuff hitting the fan and you have to react in real time because the train has left the station, either on it or under it. Tom Selleck's whining in his trailer again. Police commissioner falls into a coma. I did not know this next reader was going to be here tonight. I was just informed. The good news is I've known him since he was born, so it makes it pretty easy. Austin Minogue is going to read a poem by James Connolly. And, you know, every generation, it's like, you know, you get a little bit old, and you're like, kids today, you know. Like somehow that's a new theory. You know, as people like my uncle who fought in the Battle of the Bulge, imagine what they thought of us. So, but anyway, Austin is a fine example of the next generation, someone who is well steeped in trade union principles and believes deeply in a real commitment to doing the right thing, both on the micro level of the way he lives his life and macro level about how he wants to help, you know, shape the world we live in. He's gotten himself a very fancy education, but he hasn't forgotten where he's come from. So, without much further ado, Austin Minogue.
Wow, Tom, thanks for that introduction. Feeling pretty good right now. Good evening, everybody. This is going to be a reading of the poem Connolly by Liam McGowan. The man was all shot through that came today into the barracks square. As a soldier, I am not proud to say we killed him there. They brought him from the prison hospital to see him in that chair. I thought his smile would far more quickly call a man to prayer. Maybe we cannot understand this thing that makes these rebels die, and yet all things love freedom and the spring clear in the sky. I think I would not do this deed again for all that I hold by. Gaze down my rifle at his breast, but then a soldier I. They say he was kindly, different too, apart from all the rest. A lover of the poor, and all shot through, his wounds ill-dressed. He came before us, faced us like a man. He knew a deeper pain than blows or bullets ere the world began. Died he in vain? Ready, present, and he just smiling. God, I felt my rifle shake. His wounds were opened out, and round the chair was one red lake. I swear, his lips read fire when all was still. Before my rifle spat that cursed lead, and I was picked to kill a man like that. Thank you.
I wasn't lying, right? You know, it's hard not to think about the political situation today in the States and the sort of circus that's going on in this national election, and not think, you know, that the people walking around Dublin in 1916 would walk around here today going, wait a minute, you know, all these things we thought would be fixed by now are not really fixed. And, you know, I'm like a political crackhead, and my wife is ready to divorce me over it. I've watched every debate, like the Republican baby debates, and I watch all the coverage. I can't stop. I know I need help. But one thing I've never seen in billions of words I've heard spoken over the last year or whatever, like nobody is on TV saying, well, when we had 37% unionism in this country, we didn't have these problems. You know, we had a middle class. We didn't have this insane inequality. And it's really troubling because the solution is pretty obvious. My first union laborer job in 1980-81, I made $14.28 an hour, and I thought I was wealthy. And how many years later they're fighting to get a $15 an hour minimum wage? So it's pretty insane, and you know, it's hard to see it going anywhere soon in a positive direction. So I just hope that all the great people that I have come to know in the trade union movement, many of whom are here, just keep doing what you're doing, because otherwise we're all doomed. Our next presenter is Lorcan Collins. Lorcan was born and raised in Dublin. He founded the 1916 walking tour in 1996, which is widely acknowledged as the most informative and historically accurate of all in Dublin. He co-authored The Easter Rising, A Guide to Dublin in 1916, with Connor Costick. He wrote the biography of James Connolly for the 16 live series of books which he co-edited with Ruan O'Donnell. Lorcan has lectured on Easter 1916 in Ireland and the United States and is a regular contributor to radio, television, and historical journals. His latest book, 1916, The Rising Handbook, which came out with O'Brien Press this year, was recently published to coincide with the centenary of the Easter Rising and is already a bestseller in the field. Lorcan's passion for his subject and the players in it make his contributions to the understanding and knowledge of this seminal moment in Irish history, a real and human story. I've heard very great things about Lorcan. I feel ashamed. I actually lived in Dublin, and I did not do this tour. But next time I go back, I know I'll be spending some time. Ladies and gentlemen, Lorcan Collins.
Thank you very much. It's a real great pleasure to be here today. Having spent a long time writing a book on James Connolly, it's amazing to be in the same hall that he spoke on the 15th of September 1902. James Connolly came to the United States at the invitation of the Socialist Labour Party and planned to undertake an enormous lecture tour of the country. Daniel de Leon was the head of the SLP and had extended the invitation to Connolly. It suited both men very well. Connolly could investigate how socialism and unions were operating in the United States, and he could sell subscriptions to his newspaper, The Workers' Republic. For de Leon, having the renowned representative of the Irish working class on his side would ensure the loyalty of Irish-American socialists. Connolly, who was born into abject poverty in Edinburgh in Scotland in 1868, had a little schooling and joined the British Army at the age of 14, and for 7 years was stationed in the land of his parents, Ireland. Here he met his future wife, Lily Reynolds, married her in Scotland, and developed a healthy interest in the socialist movement through his brother John. Connolly was involved in a number of political parties and movements and was inclined towards speaking up for workers' rights at public meetings, to the extent that he was blackballed, as you say, in the States, and found it nearly impossible to get work. He decided at one stage to set up a small business in Edinburgh as a cobbler, fixing shoes, or as his brilliant advertisement stated, Connolly repairs the worn-out understandings of the brethren at the standard rates. The business was an abject failure. One comrade, Alice Munro, said she brought all of her family's shoes to Connolly for fixing, and that not one pair was wearable afterwards. A comrade asked Connolly how business was, and he commented that he was going to spend his last shilling on a shaving mirror and watch himself slowly starve to death. An appeal was made in 1896 in the radical newspaper Justice for work for Connolly, which was answered by the Dublin Socialist Club. Connolly moved his small family to Dublin and became the organiser of that club, but he basically disbanded it and founded the Irish Socialist Republican Party, which one Roy commentator in the media said had more syllables than members. Their membership card had the wonderful words which are inscribed on the Jim Larkin statue in Dublin. Some of you I met in Dublin recently. The words of the French revolutionary Camille Desmoulins, "The great appear great because we are on our knees, let us rise." And it was as a representative for the Irish Socialist Republican Party that Connolly was engaged by de Leon for the 1902 lecture. At the Cooper Union Hall on 15th September 1902, Connolly was recorded as saying, "No person can be economically free who is not politically free. and no person can be politically free who is not economically free. He then gave an account of the living conditions in Dublin and let the Irish Americans know that some of the shining lights of the Home Rule Executive Committee were in fact slum landlords. He often wrote home of his great experiences on the tour, but he found the heat of the country to be intolerable. In one particular letter to a comrade called Dan O'Brien, he wrote, "It is fearfully hot for me here, but the Americans say it is exceptionally cool. It is obvious to me that hell will be a far greater punishment to us than to the Americans. Another injustice to Ireland." Yeah. You see, Connolly, and it's often missed, he could be very witty. Murta Ling, one of his comrades, said he had a sledgehammer repartee. In one particular discussion in a place called Haverhill in Massachusetts, a listener kept interrupting him, and at one stage said to him, "You seem to know everything. Who will win the derby?" And Connolly retorted, "A horse, but I'm surprised at an ass asking." He got into a fierce argument in Troy when they had him booked for 3 lectures. And he was very tired at this stage, so he refused and essentially went on strike and refused to do the 3 talks, which would have a huge bearing on him later on. He had an argument with a man called Frank Pisano, who was in the Socialist Labour Party in Troy, and this was something that would affect him later on in life when he moved to that, to that town, which a lot of you here will know is known as Collar City. After a 3.5-month lecture tour, Connolly gained a huge amount of subscriptions to the Workers' Republic. But when he returned to Ireland, an unfortunate row occurred over the mismanagement of the funds that he had sent from America. The comrades in Dublin had set up a small bar in the club and basically spent the money on drink. Connolly was justifiably angry at this, especially as he himself was teetotal. And a split occurred in the party, and he decided that eventually he would emigrate to the United States on a permanent basis. Excuse me. His return to the US in 1903 saw a bit of a cooling with his relationship with Dan DeLeon. Most likely, as Connolly was no longer the representative of the IRSP, he was of little use to the head of the Socialist Labour Party. But Connolly luckily found work in Troy, including collecting dues for MetLife, that well-known bastion of socialism. And the following year, he was joined by the rest of his family. In 1904, Connolly had a letter printed in the Weekly People, the organ of the SLP, on wages, marriage, and the church, in which he challenged the notion, quite prevalent among some unions and socialists in the US, that there was no point in arguing for higher wages, as that only resulted in price rises. Now, the letter irked Dan DeLeon, who was editor of the Weekly People, and he considered his views to be above argument. He was the interpreter of Marx. However, Connolly was correct. The iron law of wages was not true, as Connolly later argued that prices of goods rose first and that wages climbed slowly behind them. The point is that this letter drove a large wedge between Connolly and DeLeon. In 1905, Connolly got a job in the famous Singer factory, and the family moved to Newark. This, of course, is the same year, as John mentioned already, that saw the foundation of the Industrial Workers of the World in Chicago, the founders of which read as a Hall of Fame of the early 20th century organisers: Big Bill Haywood and Charles Moyer of the Western Federated Miners, Eugene Debs of the American Railway Union, Cork-born Mary Harris, better known as Mother Jones, who fought vigorously against the use of child labour, and Bill Troutman of the United Brewery Workers Union. Someone's a wobbly. Good on you. That's 2 of us. The Wobbly's motto, "An injury to one is an injury to all," would have attracted James Connolly, and he became involved with them a year after their foundation. A little story about a man called Frank Stenenberg, the anti-unionist former governor of Idaho, who was killed in a bomb attack in February 1906. And Moyer and Haywood were accused of the crime. Connolly ran the Newark Haywood Moyer Defence Fund. Of course, you're all familiar with the facts of the case, as Albert Horsley was found guilty, and it transpired that the Pinkerton detective McParland had encouraged Horsley to say that Haywood had ordered him to do it. What it did show was the depths that the capitalists were willing to go to undermine radical unions. And it also exposed James Connolly to the IWW and to a greater audience. After he lost his job with Singer in 1907, he began to work in earnest on his tour de force, Labour in Irish History, which would eventually be published in 1910. In 1907, after Mayor George B. McLennan said, "There are Russian socialists, there are Jewish socialists, there are German socialists, but thank God there are no Irish socialists." Connolly's reaction to this statement was that he founded the Irish Socialist Federation and also the journal of that organisation, a very wonderful newspaper called The Harp. The Federation aligned itself with some of Connolly's old comrades. There was a bit of a thawing of the argument that went on there in the earlier days in 1902. The comrades now in Dublin were calling themselves the Irish Socialist Party. In July 1907, the IWW employed James Connolly as head organiser in New York. By December of that year, De Leon launched a bizarre attack on Connolly at a general SLP meeting with a debate on the criminal actions, as he called them, of James Connolly. They dragged up everything they could on him, his refusal to speak 3 times in Troy, and how he allegedly split the IRSP in Dublin. Around the same time, Connolly was bringing 10,000 Irish and Italian longshoremen into the Wobblies. De Leon claimed Connolly was a Jesuit agent trying to break up the labour movement by bringing so many Catholics into it. The charges were, of course, ridiculous, and Connolly won the day with the great support of the IWW, and De Leon was routed lock, stock and barrel. By April 1908, he had joined the Socialist Party of America, and indeed ended up lecturing for them and encouraging people to vote for Eugene Debs. I think it's fair to say that if Connolly was alive today now, he would rail against Donald Trump and his ignorant racist mantra designed to pit the working class against each other, and would truly have been a Bernie man. A collection of essays entitled Socialism Made Easy was published by a man called Charles H. Kerr in Chicago in 1909. That book, Socialism Made Easy, does exactly what it says on the cover. And one of the problems with socialist writers is they often try to make an interpretation of Marx much more difficult than it should be. And Connolly knew exactly who he should direct his words to, the working class for whom he was trying to emancipate. He got a check for $45, which, as far as I'm concerned, having written a fairly in-depth biography of him, was about the most money that he ever earned in one quick go. It also enabled him to undertake a major lecture tour of the United States on behalf of the Socialist Party. He went to Washington, Ohio, Indiana, Missouri, Iowa, Colorado, Texas, Arizona, Montana, and California. An 11-month tour, which is exhausting but amazing for him. All through that time, he kept in touch with Dublin until eventually an offer of a lecture tour secured his decision to return home. Again, he left his wife and children in New York, and in July 1910, he arrived home to Dublin. His old comrade, who he used to write to, Daniel O'Brien's mother, said he looked very well. He told her he managed to get something to eat while he was in America. Meanwhile in Ireland, Big Jim Larkin had founded the Irish Transport and General Workers Union. And Connolly eventually became the Ulster organiser for the union and moved his whole family up to Belfast. His time in the US had matured him, and he learned a great deal about organising with the IWW. His time in the US had shown him how bosses exploit ethnic differences to divide workers. The same in Belfast, where workers were divided along religious grounds, often with deadly effect. Most of all, Connolly learned how important propaganda was to those who seek to organise. For the next 5 years, he would always ensure that he had his hand on the editorial pen of one newspaper or journal. When Connolly and James Larkin joined forces together to fight for union recognition against William Martin Murphy, Dublin's biggest employer, Connolly was the driving force behind the foundation of the greatest workers' defence force ever seen in Ireland, if not in the world. On the 31st of August 1913, Jim Larkin appeared in the window of the Imperial Hotel and spoke to the workers at an illegal gathering. The police ran in there and arrested Larkin and dragged him out on the streets. The famous Countess Markovitz shouted 3 cheers for Jim Larkin, and a policeman slapped her in the face, and all hell broke loose. The policeman came out of the side streets and gathered everybody together, kettling they call it, and bet the head off people. And in the weekend of violence, 3 people were murdered by the police. And that's why James Connolly and a man called Captain Jack White and Jim Larkin founded the Irish Citizen Army to defend the workers against the brutality of the police. A Galway art teacher by the name of McGahey eventually designed a wonderful flag for the Irish Citizen Army. I've seen a few of you with the badge on tonight. The starry plough, or the plough on the stars. The plough being the symbol of the dignity of physical labour, and the stars representing socialism, essentially. One of the wonderful aspects of the Citizen Army, or the ICA, is that women were allowed an equal role in the organisation. Countess Markovitz fought in that uniform in 1916 as second in command in Stephen's Green. A tremendous friend of James Connolly, whose house was always open to not only the Connolly family, but to an organisation that she run of Boy Scouts in Dublin called Na Fianna, or the Warriors. Dr. Kathleen Lynn of the Irish Citizen Army took over in City Hall when Sean Connolly and Sean O'Reilly were killed in action during the Rising. Rosie Hackett, who led 2 strikes in Jacob's Biscuit Factory and was given work as an organiser by Connolly when she was blackballed, fought in the uniform of the ICA during Easter Week 1916. Rosie was involved in the Irish Women Workers Union with the Abbey actor Helena Maloney, and they also fought together in the ICA. There's a picture up there of Delia Larkin, one of the main founders of the Irish Women Workers Union. You can see just at the door on the right-hand side. And incidentally, Rosie Hackett has a new bridge over the Liffey named in her honour. It's one bridge out of 24 over the River Liffey, the rest named after men, but nonetheless, it is a start. I was there the day the bridge was opened, and they had a podium set up, and from the podium the talk was how brilliant it was that finally women's role in the revolution is being recognised. And this beautiful little old Dublin woman pulling one of those trolleys full of her shopping behind her stumbled upon the event, and when there was a silence in the proceedings, shouted up, "How come there's no women on that podium?" And sure enough, it was 3 men who launched the bridge. There's no recovery after that, is there? One of my favourite women from that period is a Glaswegian from Glasgow, obviously, in case you don't know, in Scotland. Margaret Skinner is her name. She left her job as a maths teacher, and with her final cheque, she bought a Lee Enfield rifle. All teachers dream of doing the same with their final cheque. And she made her way to Dublin and lived with Countess Markovitz. And on the morning of the Rising, herself and 9 women were to be picked up and brought to Eamon de Valera's position with the 3rd Battalion in Boland's Bakery and Boland's Mills. However, nobody came for the women, so instead they fought up in Stephen's Green. Margaret was wounded 3 times during the uprising. throwing a bomb into the Russell Hotel to try and burn a sniper out. He retorted by shooting her 3 times. And years later, she said to Eamon de Valera, "How come you left us women standing there? Why didn't you bring us down to Boland's?" And de Valera says, "With hindsight, I should have brought all the women because it would have freed up my men from the cooking duties." So you can imagine her reaction to that. If Connolly was a socialist and trades unionist who became a revolutionary, tonight, as you've already heard, we also remember a man who was a revolutionary first, and then in his later life, a trades unionist and a communist. Mike Quill, who fought with the IRA and admired James Connolly so much, as John said, that he named his own union in honour of Larkin and Connolly's Transport Workers' Union. On a visit to Dublin during 1938, Quill outlined what he believed was the key lesson of his American experience. Seeing how the transit employers exploited religious and racial divisions, Quill concluded that if we, black and white, Catholic and non-Catholic, Jew and Gentile, are good enough to slave and sweat together, then we are good enough to unite and fight together. Our common cause, back in the early 20th century, as much as it is now, workers of America, Ireland, and indeed the world need to organise or die. And many men and women died as organisers, be they Joe Hill or James Connolly or Mike Quill. Their legacy is that the strength and courage of their conviction still shines a guiding light for workers everywhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorcan. That was terrific. I just booked my flight to Dublin while I was sitting there. Technology. 1994, I think it was. I'm walking down a street in Dublin on a Sunday. Door of a pub flies open. An old farmer comes out, and he's got a cell phone pressed to his head. He goes, "How the hell did you know I was here?" A little lag in the technology and the understanding of it. Although at that time they were way ahead of the United States with the technology. Next, I'm going to read here what it says about Larry Kirwan, and I'll tell you a little bit about what I know about Larry Kirwan. Larry Kirwan was the leader of the Irish political rock band Black 47 for 25 years, a playwright and novelist, an Irish Echo columnist and host-producer of Celtic Crush on Sirius XM satellite radio. He has written 15 plays and musicals, 3 novels, a memoir, and a history of Irish music. I was very fortunate to encounter Larry Kirwan for the first time, probably around 1991, when Black 47 sort of exploded onto the scene. And if you were around New York at that time, it was really sort of a great convergence of time and place and music and people. And they had a residency at Paddy Riley's down on 2nd Avenue. And what's amazing about Larry, and I do not want to disparage that he's an excellent novelist. He's a great storyteller across many mediums. But I think it was important, particularly for people like myself at the time. My father was kind of funny about the whole Irish thing because he was an immigrant kid and he wanted us to be Americans. We weren't allowed to play Irish football and these other things. And, other families, they pushed their kids heavy into that stuff. Baseball, red, white, and blue, American, like many first-generation immigrants. So, but at the same time, we knew that we were Irish, and a lot of our relatives spoke with brogues, and I had a pretty good sense of the history of it. But what's great about art and music is how that history and that story really comes to life. And I don't think anywhere in my life has that come so purely and crystal clear than through the works of Larry and Black 47. It was just a really exciting time and place to be. Larry is a very talented musician. Another thing I realized while getting to know him is he's an expert, oddly enough, in dead languages. Because sometimes people would be about 14 pints in during an intermission, and then they'd go up to Larry, and Larry would be, oh, it's brilliant, it's brilliant. He never got exasperated. He never wanted to, he wanted to slap them, but he never let you know. Anyway, it gives me a very great and distinct pleasure to introduce Larry Kerwin.
I might have been an expert in dead languages, but I always admired Yeats, so let me just give you a little bit of Easter 1916. I have met them at close of day, coming with vivid faces, from counter or desk, among gray 18th century houses. I have passed with a nod of the head or polite meaningless words, or have lingered a while and said polite, meaningless words, and thought before I had done of a mocking tale or a jibe to please a companion around the fire at the club, being certain that they and I but lived where motley is worn. All changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. That woman's days were spent in ignorant goodwill, her nights in argument until her voice grew shrill. What voice more sweet than hers when young and beautiful she rode to harriers? This man had kept a school and rode our winged horse. This other, his helper and friend, was coming into his force. He might have won fame in the end. So sensitive his nature seemed, so daring and sweet his thought. This other man I had dreamed, a drunken, vainglorious lout. He had done most bitter wrong to some who are near my heart, yet I number him in the song. He too has resigned his part in the casual comedy. He too has been changed in his turn, transformed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. Hearts with one purpose alone through summer and winter seem enchanted to a stone to trouble the living stream. The horse that comes from the road, the rider, the birds that range from cloud to tumbling cloud, minute by minute they change. A shadow of cloud on the stream changes minute by minute. A horse hoof slides on the brim, and a horse splashes within it. The long-legged moorhens dive, and hens to moorcocks call. Minute by minute they live. The stones in the midst of all. Too long a sacrifice can make a stone with a heart. Oh, when may it suffice that is heaven's part, our part, to murmur name upon name as a mother names her child when sleep at last has come on limbs that had run wild? What is it but nightfall? No, no, not night, but death. Was it needless death after all? For England